Miles Morales has always had a pretty hefty job of living up to the standards set by Peter Parker. But you know what? In many ways, he's not just managed to reach those standards, but exceed them as well. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 times that Miles Morales' Spider-Man totally outdid Peter Parker. Number 10. Original origins. Now, a good origin story is arguably the most vital part of any comic book hero. Peter Parker has what we like to call a textbook origin. An unlikely person has an accident of some kind and wakes up totally changed. And you know what? That sort of story is old hat at this point, but it's not cliche if you invented the cliche. Brian Michael Bendis faced an uphill battle in making Miles' origin different enough to be an original take, but similar enough to result in another character named Spider-Man. He ended up deciding to give Miles a spider bite as well, but this time it was tied more closely to Miles' personal life. The bite in question would be the result of Miles' uncle Aaron doing a job as the Prowler and accidentally picking up the genetically altered bug and bringing it back to his place, where Miles finds it and gets the bite. Another huge difference between Miles and Peter is what happened directly after being bitten. Now, Peter Parker, though not at first the most heroic, soon decides to heed his uncle's words and take on the great responsibility that his great powers entail. Miles, on the other hand, well, he doesn't want to be a hero. Even after his best friend Genki tries to convince him to use his powers to fight crime, Miles tells him that he just wants to be a normal teen. Even during the death of his hero, Peter Parker, Miles, well, does nothing. It's the shock from this event that inspires Miles to finally put on the mask. Seeing this different interpretation of how somebody would react to getting spider powers wasn't only refreshing, it was actually pretty realistic. Number 9. Uncle. Okay, so everyone knows that Uncle Ben is one of the core tenets of the Spider-Man mythos. Well, seemingly everyone except for the MCU Spidey, that is, but that's a different story. Well, Miles' answer to that is Miles' uncle, Aaron Davis, aka the Prowler. Starting as a Peter Parker Spider-Man villain in issue number 78 of The Amazing Spider-Man in 1969, the Prowler's story is just as interesting as his nephew's. The Prowler has had many iterations as well, but the Aaron Davis version is by far the most popular, even making his MCU debut in 2017's Spider-Man Homecoming as portrayed by Donald Glover. While no one is claiming that Uncle Ben is unimportant, the MCU proved that you can tell a great Spidey origin without him and still hit many of the important beats. Now, the same cannot be said about a Miles story without the Prowler. Miles' father, who we'll get into in just a second, and Aaron Davis provide a great dichotomy, showing Miles what happens when you forget to use your powers for good. And no matter how you roll the dice, the Prowler has simply just got much more significant effect on the story of Spider-Man than poor old Uncle Ben ever could. Maybe it's the fact that Aaron Davis just is more active in Miles' life, because Uncle Ben kind of, for the most part, just was subjected to a background role. Number 8. Part parents, part spies, all bad. Okay, so hear me out on this one. No superhero needs parents who are spies. Now, I can hear you all typing in the comments already, but hold on. Isn't one of the reasons we relate to superheroes, especially to Spider-Man, the fact that they are normal people? Well, aside from their super selves. Of course, comics are full of exceptions, but at least in the case of Miles Morales and Peter Parker, being an everyday kid is part of the appeal. We got a different backstory in The Amazing Spider-Man and its sequel from 2012 and 2014 respectively. Based on the story hinted at in Spider-Man's original 1960s run, we saw Peter's entire motivation as a hero change from being a friendly neighborhood superhero to unraveling the mystery of his spy parents' treason. Now, Miles Morales' story deals with this in a much better way. Directly after taking the mantle of Spider-Man, Miles is contacted by Nick Fury, who informs him of his father's double life as a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. While this certainly makes more sense in Miles' story, especially with the origins of the Prowler being tied to S.H.I.E.L.D., it still takes away some of the reliability of the Miles Morales character. Thankfully, future Miles Morales writers have realized this and gone to great measures to fix it. In the video game title Spider-Man on the PS4 and its Miles Morales sequel, Jefferson Davis is not a spy but a police officer. The same alteration was made for Into the Spider-Verse. Even in the comics, Jefferson has decided to step back from the spy world to spend more time with his family. And where I'm from, we call that growth and character development, something that the Peter Parker spy parent storyline failed to provide entirely. Number 7. 16 and Super. Now, if you asked a room of people who had never read a comic to describe the most recognizable things about Spider-Man, you'd of course get most people saying things like webs and red and blue suit and things like that, but without a doubt, one of his most recognizable features is his youth. Now, Peter Parker has obviously been portrayed as being young as well, but Miles Morales is a modern teen. Now, don't get me wrong, Peter Parker's story is still functional with him as a teen. In fact, the Amazing Spider-Man series of comics recently rebooted to take Peter back to his teenage days. But despite this, many argue that Peter Parker works best as a young adult. I mean, look no further than the end of 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home, which showed Peter renting out his own apartment, studying for his GED, and balancing it all while fighting crime. In contrast, Miles got his powers in the 8th grade at 13. In the comics, we've never even seen a grown-up version of Miles, except for maybe the Old Man Miles concept comic that takes place in the future, which is definitely worth a read. Miles is tied tightly to his origins as a teen, and while we will no doubt continue to watch him grow in the comics and the films, it's difficult to imagine him moving on from Brooklyn Visions Academy. Number 6. Genki? Ned? Ged? Alright, so this one is a kind of hot-button topic. If you're only a Spider-Man fan from the movies, you might have no idea who Genki Lee is. But if you've followed Miles' story in the comics, you'll know of his importance. As the first person to discover that Miles had powers, Genki naturally became Miles' right-hand man. At times, he's even become Miles' guy in the chair, helping him fight bad guys and solve crimes from the safety of their dorm room at Brooklyn Visions Academy. Which kind of sounds familiar, right? That's right, Ned Leeds from the MCU Spider-Man films is basically an exact copy of Genki Lee, with only a few minor changes. So why did Marvel's writers decide to take Genki from Miles and give him to Peter? Well, there is a lot of reasons. One cited by Homecoming's writer Jonathan Goldstein was that Spidey fans had already seen 2 versions of the Peter and Harry Osborn friendship. Ned, like Genki, is one of the first to discover Peter's secret, and just like his comic counterpart, Ned becomes a key ally for Peter throughout the MCU Spidey trilogy, and the similarities only continue from there. Genki and Ned are both great characters. Of course, fans now wonder what the writers of the MCU Miles story will do, whether they have 2 similar characters both be Spider BFFs, or perhaps switch Genki out for a Harry Osborn-like character and a kind of swap of the classic stories. But whatever they choose to do, fans of Ned in the MCU have Miles Morales to thank for his entire character. Number 5. Unlimited power. So Miles is just a younger and more relatable version of Peter Parker, right? Well, not exactly. You see, Miles got bit by a slightly different spider than Peter. Because of the difference in spiders, Miles has certain abilities that Peter isn't privy to. Chief of these abilities is Miles' Venom Touch, followed by his invisibility. Featured in both the film and video games, the Venom Strike is an electrical charge built up in Miles' body that allows him to electrocute criminals, redirect electrical currents, and provide bioelectricity energy bolts. This power references the abilities that certain real-life spiders have to stun their prey with very small electric jolts, which probably looks as badass as it sounds. Miles' other unique ability is invisibility. The natural camouflage that many arachnids use to survive is often used by Miles when he's in over his head. As an extremely young crime fighter who is often without backup, Miles always needs a little exit strategy. Therefore, turning invisible and web swinging away is always an option. Now, having the Miles power set is definitely an upgrade of the Peter Parker powers, but there's also some setbacks. Miles has been shown to have a slightly weaker Spidey sense than Petey, and he's also unable to make his own web shooters or web fluid, relying on Genki to craft him more. Number 4. Box office greatness. There's a new undisputed box office juggernaut when it comes to Spider-Man movies, and that is, of course, the final entry in the Homecoming trilogy, Spider-Man No Way Home. Looking at the box office returns alone, you might be swayed to believe that Peter Parker's Spider-Man films just do better than ones that feature Miles. To that I say, Miles has only had one. In his first, and so far only, chance to shine, Miles did unexpectedly well. For being an animated Marvel film not even produced by Marvel about a character and a storyline that not many outside of the world of comics had even heard of before, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was huge. The highest critic score on Rotten Tomatoes for any Spider-Man movie belongs to the Spider-Verse, with a fan score of 93% and a critic score of 97%. The only film that rivals it is Spider-Man No Way Home, which has a fan score of a whopping 98%, but a critic score of only 93%. What should be remembered here is that No Way Home features 3 Spideys, was the conclusion of a trilogy and part of the MCU, which again is Hollywood's biggest franchise, and still couldn't contend with what critics thought of Into the Spider-Verse. Of any first outing for any of the 4 Spider-Men we have seen lead a film, Miles has had the best reviews from both critics and fans alike. Number 3. The Miles Morales Clone Saga. Now, to many Spidey fans, clone is considered a rather dirty word. This is the result of the admittedly chaotic first foray into clones that the Spider-Man series had back in 1994, which was not well received by, well, basically anyone. But we ain't talking about Ben Reilly or the Scarlet Spider here. No, in Miles Morales' version of the classic clone story, the drama is actually cranked up to 11. Starting immediately after a hangout with Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel, Miles discovers that somebody dressed in his suit has kidnapped a scientist. After a short fight, Miles convinces Peter that somebody has framed him, and the two team up to stop the Miles clones before it's too late. The saga goes on to see 3 different clones of Miles, including his exact opposite, Selim, which yes is just Miles backwards, and Shift, a disfigured clone that goes on to become an ally to Miles after Selim threatens Miles' new little sister. The climax of the story sees Selim and Mind Spinner, the 3rd clone, blow each other up, defies Selim, and defends Shift. The following panels see Miles mourn the loss of his 2 clones, who he calls his brothers. One need only look at the original Spider-Man clone saga to see how much of an improvement this version was. What was convoluted, confusing, and ended up just in a huge flop was transformed into a unique and emotional story. Number 2. All about fashion. There's no denying how iconic Peter Parker's red and blue suit is, thanks to Spidey's global appeal, evidenced by the fact that Spidey films are supported by 21 languages. Spider-Man's costume might just be the most recognizable super suit in the world. So how do you make the best even better? Well, the answer is you don't. Artist Sarah Pacelli knew that she didn't have to reinvent the wheel here. What works about Spider-Man would stick around. In fact, Miles started off wearing the exact same suit that Peter wore. He was heckled in the street and told that his costume was in bad taste considering the recent loss of their universe's original Spider-Man. With the help of Gwen Stacy, Aunt May, and Genki, Miles designed a new suit that was able to represent his Spider-Man in a familiar but unique way. The black suit is reminiscent of Peter's turn with the Venom symbiote, but the red webbing is totally original. Honoring the iconic while being new and original is what Miles Morales is about. There's no replacement for Peter Parker, so why try to be? Taking the mantle and making it his own is what the Miles Morales comics are all about at their core, and nowhere is that better presented than in the suit he wears. And number 1, stories yet to tell. So here it is, the number 1 reason why Miles Morales completely outshines Peter Parker as the current Marvel Universe Spider-Man, and that is the fact that he has stories that have not yet been told. Peter Parker is old. Maybe not in the world of comics, games, or films, but definitely in comic book history. You would be hard-pressed to find a Spider-Man story that is unique and untold. I mean, there are exceptions, the Superior Spider-Man run, for example, but what writers can do with Miles is completely different. Miles Morales is a fresh and new character, especially when compared to some of his comic book counterparts that have been around since the middle of the 20th century. This means that there are a lot more opportunities to do something with Miles that have never been done before. Giving him a sister, why not? How about a romantic relationship with an all-new hero dressed as a bird? Sure, that works. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. As the release of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 comes closer and closer, fans are eagerly waiting to see where this character is taken next. I, for one, cannot wait to see where Miles, the Prowler, Jefferson Davis, Genki, and the whole Miles squad do when they face multiversal threats once again. But whatever happens next, with Miles in the lead, it's sure to be spectacular. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 times Miles Morales' Spider-Man totally outdid Peter Parker. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friends. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.